Welcome to the Zulu One podcast. In this episode, we're diving into a profound conversation with Tiziano, an expert in family constellations, exploring the intersections of systemic healing, gender dynamics, and the role of fathers in shaping our lives. We tackle one of today's most pressing issues, incels, and the modern challenges tied to absent masculinity, while uncovering the deeper science and the systemic principles behind this transformative work. From forgiveness through a Christian lens and the vital balance between the victim and the perpetrator, Tiziano offers a thought-provoking insight and actionable wisdom. Let's explore how stepping into masculinity can transform lives and societies. Thank you. Man, that was powerful. Ooh, man.
I feel very grounded.
You feel grounded. Good.
I do.
Good.
Solid and ready to talk.
And you know, for the listeners, we start the Zulu One podcast with a guided meditation, just to get everybody in the same vibe, right? To get everybody the guest on the same page, and to open space, in so many ways. So and it's such I'm always in awe of when somebody new comes in that you've never met, right? And you're like meditating together suddenly, and there's just like this shared intimacy, which is really cool to do. So thank you for doing that with me. That was really cool.
Pleasure, John. Pleasure. And it's good to feel grounded before having a good conversation.
Right.
A conversation in service.
Yeah. So Tiziano, I've been following you on Instagram for a long time. Your content is extraordinary. You're a facilitator on the other side of the world for me, right, in Australia, and I'm very grateful for how you're amplifying the voice of this incredible work. Tell me a little bit about how you came into this. How did you find this modality? Because I was reading your background, and man, you're what I would call a healing warrior, right? So. Or a warrior healer.
Yes, John, you're right. So I had a very colorful upbringing as far as now, from a pleasurable childhood until 6 or 7 years old, and then the crack happened when my parents divorced, and it was a very, very difficult divorce with a lot of violence involved. After that, there was a very difficult teenage years for me, like borderline criminality and so on. Then I moved to the better, no? The universe always moves us to the better, so I moved into kickboxing and combat sports, and that was a stamp mark for me to coming where I am now. I led the path as a professional kickboxer until 29, 30 years old, something like that. The last couple of years, I was a personal trainer of rich and famous people in Sydney. So it was my dream while I was fighting. I'm like, I don't feel this path is longer for me. I want to do something. Perhaps I want to become a personal trainer of rich and famous people, wealthy people. I had this dream, like looking up to this kind of lifestyle. And I did until I became a businessman around 2016, 2017. Things didn't go as they were planned. We invested a lot of money in a boxing gear equipment company. So we imported boxing gear from Italy to Australia. And I went again in one of my colorful experiences in life. I went in profound debt with the company, over hundreds of euros. And then I found Family Constellations. So... because one of my friends told me, you had a very colorful upbringing of any kind, borderline criminality, jail, anything that you name it, I did it. And also this experience of profound debt in business. So there might be something you're carrying that is not yours. So at the time, John, I wasn't very much into self-development or something like that. So I took it as I'm very curious. I'm Sagittarius, double Sagittarius, a star sign. And I'm very curious, so I went to do this first experience of Family Constellations, and it took everything from me in terms of it changed my life 360. And since that day, I feel I've devoted myself in full to this modality. When I made it my full-time job in 2019, and I made a further call into that. I wanted to expand this modality, do more about it, express, show more. So it was my call to do that since 2019. I started to record what I was doing, do a lot of video, do a lot of podcasting, and literally putting out and make more of also my own, despite the beautiful teaching that the great Bert Hellinger left to us. I wanted to do more and make more, personalize it. And this is what I've done, this is what I'm doing, and I'm sure I will lead a worldwide movement with that, because I really feel the call in that. It's a big call in me. That's what comes to the surface and want to share.
Yeah, that's such a cool transition, and your life and my life have parallels in some way. That, for me, it wasn't kickboxing. For me, it was the military. So, in the military, I found structure in that life, and it's very similar. That these rough backgrounds bring us to healing, and I would imagine that birds of a feather flock together in some capacity, and doing constellations is, you were probably only one of the only men in the groups for many workshops, right?
I still am sometimes. I travel around the world. I went to Belgrade, Serbia, more than 2 months ago, and there was a big group of 40 people, 40 women. So I still have these experiences, John, to these days. Yes.
Yeah. That's that's the my first constellation was in Romania, and it was psychiatrists and psychologists and psychiatrists, so it was pretty mixed. But every workshop after, it's like me and my brother-in-law a lot of the times is one of the only men, and it's just a very female-dominated work, which is I find extraordinarily interesting.
Yeah, same. I at the beginning, obviously, it was quite weird. I was like, we are few men into that, but I guess that's how it's meant to be, and that's how it works, and I'm okay with that. I'd also have some systemic explanation in myself in regards to that, why I lead majorly women, but maybe we get into it afterwards. But yeah, definitely. Yeah,
I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear where that comes from. I'd love to hear what that is.
There's a few, John, understanding that I've acknowledged over the years. The first one is when a man is close to his father, he's trustworthy in the eyes of women. When a man is only close to his mother, generally women, they don't trust him in full, because what he does unconsciously, he seeks value from them. So he takes value from their eyes rather than actually embody his own value within. But once they perceive a man who is close to his father, and when I say close, I don't mean physically, but I mean in heart, they trust him. So that's why me and my father are one, and I lead majorly women worldwide. If I even see all my clientele these days, I expand as well in men, but I would say 95%, or maybe 90-10. Another important understanding, John, in regard to this, I have grown up with my mother, and her friends. So I have developed also that feminine empathy within me, that feminine energy. I feel very comfortable around women. However, even if I would have only grew up with women, and I grew up with women, and my closeness to his mother wouldn't be enough. My closeness to my mother wouldn't be enough. The fact that I'm close to my father in heart makes me trustworthy in the eyes of women. So that's what I came about.
Makes sense. One of my first constellation, I was, this is very personal, but I was like dating all the wrong women, for many years. Like, it was just, I was looking for the relationship with my mother, basically, right? Because I was so emotionally entangled with my mother, because my dad, the traumatic divorce, and dad left, and I assumed the position of the partner, and, very much in that position of the male role model of the family. And as I did my constellation, 6 months later, I met my wife, and I'm like, of course, because there was no space for a partner, because I was the emotional partner of my mother. And so I completely resonate with what you're saying, because it's just, people don't understand these dynamics, and like how detrimental this trauma can be in setting up men and setting up women for the entangled roles that they'll have in the future,
You name it, like the majority of divorce or rough upbringing with parents comes to the fact that the father leaves or the mother, let's say, excludes him to a certain extent, and obviously the son takes his role, and the mother states something like, you are a much better man than your father. Oh my lord, this is the epiphany of Bert Hellinger blessing falls from the sky every time someone says that.
Yeah, and such a poisoning of 50% of who they are. You know, it's saying you're just pouring acid into the soul of a young man to say you're so much better than your father. It's like,
they place
what a wound.
They place a burden, a responsibility on us that is so big to carry, and then we demise it out of guilt. So it is something to how I say, release it or renounce that position. Yeah, I renounce.
Yeah. And you know, are you familiar with we're going deep into the weeds already, but are you familiar with the Incel movement in the United States?
No.
So there's these movements that we're going to go deep in the weeds on this one. So
Please.
There's these movements in the United States that are called incels. So incel is involuntarily celibate. And many of the people that have committed atrocities in the United States come from this community, right? That it is a profound sense of victimization that will create a perpetrator, right? Because, and I have this theory, and I want to talk to a fellow facilitator about this, is
Please.
that it comes from that, you know, like the hating the women, isolation, and the profound wound of being in that place that half of you is, and I'm going to curse, is a piece of shit, and that all men are pieces of shit. You're the only person that can fulfill that role in my life, that devouring mother. And then they can turn that into a profound sense of, you know, kicking the table or throwing the world upside down in these extreme acts of violence. And so I'm like, you know, there's this movement that happens, and that's how dangerous, you know, putting the male child in that position is, because they become, you know, they rage against the world.
I always like, John, to simplify things, no? And I always say, when you take only one parent, you become half a person. And the other half a person that you don't take from within, you externalize, and you try to seek that person outside. Let's say a man, let's say a woman, whatever, you seek this value from outside. When you don't find this value, when you don't find this love, you become angry. Angry is when a person cannot love, they get angry. It's very simple. So they get angry, and with anger, you go on. And the more angry you become, and the more prideful you become. The more prideful you become, to a certain extent, the more emotional you amplify a negative emotion, then you come to the point, perhaps, where you become apathetic, because the below anger, what is? Sadness. So when the sadness is too wide, John, you become apathetic. And the biggest atrocities in the world are done not from an anger standpoint, but from an apathetic standpoint. Because when you have anger, you have still emotional capacity. You relate to the other on an emotional level. So it's difficult to do an atrocity when there is an emotional understanding and intelligence in place. But when the sadness is too much and you become apathetic, that is when you do the worst action. The majority of killers are you see them in an apathetic state. Even simple things, John, when there is a breakup and the wife or the husband, they cheat 1, 2, 3 times, they do horrible things to the other, they have done in a profound state of sadness, which becomes apathy. So they do those atrocities, there's horrible action towards the other from an apathy standpoint, vindicative, and on and on and on.
Yeah, it's almost a surrender of their agency to a collective anger or collective, you know, atrocity, right?
Definitely.
Rather than, you know, the assumption of responsibility that this work has. And man, that's such a, I heard one time that the opposite of love isn't hate. The opposite of love is apathy. that like indifference is, it's just like when you put it in that context, it's like, it's very, very, very easy to digest, you know, to look at it from that perspective.
Apathy responds to no emotional intelligence. So what you would call a brain of the emotions is not connected to it. The worst actions are done in apathy. There are people that they break relationship, and out of a vindicative experience, they enter another relationship from a state of apathy, because the other one ended so badly, so hurtful, that they need some sort of emotion to kick them back in, and they enter that relationship in a form of apathy, only to see in 6, 8, 9 months that those emotions that they were suppressed at the start comes to the surface, and everything is thrown into this new encounter, and you know how it ends.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things that I struggle with the most is that, you know, I don't know how long you've been doing this work, but I've been involved with Constellations since 2008. And you just see these patterns repeat over and over and over and over and over and over again. And it's like, yeah, of course they're doing this because so-and-so and this dynamic, and you know the math, you know, and you know the probabilities. And it's like, probably because they have a bad relationship with their mom or dad or whatever that looks like. How do you deal with, you know, I know Hellinger at the end of his life would do constellations almost without words, you know, just because there was such energetic movement happening. Like, how do you, because I see that when I see your clips, you're very didactic. You teach so much, like you teach very well while during your constellation. I've never been to one of your constellations, but from your clips, how do you constantly teach the same subject over and over again without, you know, kind of becoming, you know, just mundane to the conversation?
That's an awesome question, John, and I also like to answer this in details. I always like John to respond to personal questions, and I tell you the difference. When someone asks a question from a theoretical standpoint, you see that the magnetism is missing. And how I do perceive that this is missing, I see from the public, from the clientele. They get distracted, maybe they go on the phone, they look on the side. But when somebody asks a question that is personal to them, you see that an higher intelligence kicks in. So perhaps this question connects the other person on the other side of the room and on the other person on the other side of the room. So we become oneness, and my response is really coming from within. I don't tap into my theoretical knowledge, which I do have. I love to study, I love to read. I do this every day. It's my full-time job. But I actually tap from something within. Perhaps there is a personal response, a personal knowledge that I've gained through my journey. So I embody this. It's like I'm facilitating, I'm performing a movement of the soul by answering. And this is the difference when I say, please, when you ask me a question, don't ask me about how come the clouds come in Mexico and not in US, but tell me something about you, what you want to know about your personal situation, because you see that the collective is connected all within. We perform a movement of the soul.
Oh, so you're almost, the constellation is not necessarily happening in the movement that's happening in the people, but also the explanation of the larger collective group that's witnessing the explanation that's coming from the intuitive space. Is that, am I putting that correctly?
That is absolutely correct. I always say, when we enter this room, everything is a constellation. From the question, from falling the glass, from the door is not closing, everything is becoming a movement of the soul. Something happened I was facilitating in Zurich. It was in Switzerland. I just share this to make you understand how I see it. And on the Saturday, we couldn't close. We finished the work. I always do 2 days workshop, John. Saturday and Sunday together. It's like a movement together. On the Saturday, we couldn't close the door because something happened to the key. Like, we couldn't close the door on the Saturday afternoon. When I came back Sunday morning, I revisit the last constellation because the last constellation wasn't closed. I took it as a sign there was something was not closed. So I always say, when we enter this, already from the Friday, you enter a movement of the soul. Things happening, stuff happening, and whatever it is, and we perform it until the Sunday when we leave it. So everything happening in details, the constellation themselves, the observation themselves, the question, everything is a single movement of the soul.
Wow. I mean, that really talks about the, larger system that we're dealing with. Some people say we're always in the field, right?
Yeah,
Which
Bill,
is
we
true.
are.
We're always in the field.
We
It
are.
depends on the attention, and you're absolutely right. You see people that come to a constellation, they get to the door, they turn around and they leave. Or their car wouldn't start, or their dog got sick, or their alarm didn't go off, and the systemic resistance that's saying no, I want this to stay the same, I don't change anything. So you're absolutely right that you take so much information from the context of the ecosystem, right? That you're saying if the door's not closing, if there's a barking dog during the constellation, or there's an ambulance goes by and you hear sirens going on, is like what was the emergency? What was the thing that came out? You're so right about that. It's such a mystic, incredible thing that we get to experience, that we get to facilitate on a regular basis. It's a beautiful gift from the universe. I'm just so humbled that we get to have these conversations,
It's the same, John. And I'm gonna tell you a little more about that, what I've discovered over the last 2 years. I do this full time since 2019, but I started 2-3 years prior 2019 to engage in Constellation. I learned that every time I perform a workshop, we re-experience our birth. So from Friday to Sunday, we go through our birth in depth, from the beginning to the end of it. And I've acknowledged that our life is a constant repetition of our birth experience.
Wow. How did you come to that realization?
Well, I went to a workshop myself, which was called Rebirth. And he's probably my favorite facilitator worldwide. He's Italian, Gabriele Policardo, and he's a student of Bert Hellinger. And the facilitation was called Rebirth, and it was about the birth experience. I went with my mother. And during the workshop, I've acknowledged the dynamic that I was going through with my mother. There was so much hate that I couldn't even stay close to her. And then we went to talk about what happened at my birth. So I reconstructed, and then I started to give workshop. And I realized that, that's what the people are doing here. And I was asking questions to them and stuff. They go through their birth experience from the beginning to the end of it. And what they do through the time they are there, they reconstruct it. So wherever their birth has gone with some form of interrupted movements with their mother, they are able to release those interrupted movements and allow love to flow again. Where the flow of love was interrupted.
Yeah. That's what this work is, right? It's like
that's right.
We just had a magic wand of fixing where the flow of love was interrupted, we'd have a peaceful world, right? A peaceful and prosperous world.
That's right.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, what was your first constellation experience? What took you there? What was the thing that kind of opened this journey up?
What took me there, John, was this debt of money, this major debt of money that was over 120,000 euro. And what was my first constellation was about my uncle Giuseppino, who died when he was 15 years old, killed under a tragic car accident. So my grandmother didn't send him to school that day, to school trip, because she was worried that something could happen to him. And guess what? That day didn't go to the school trip. He left the house to go and see his own uncle, and a truck passed over the street and he killed him. That was was a stem mark of my family falling into destruction over the years. He was only 15 and my dad was 3. And my grandfather died straight after, 10, 15 years later. So my dad at the time was 15 and his father died. So it remained my grandmother and my father. And then eventually led to my father meeting my mother, and my mother go and live into my grandmother and my father's house. And then eventually over time, Tiziano, here he is. So the constellation was about the guilt of losing money, of losing houses, of making debt that my father did over years, but he didn't lose at the end any money. He gave the money back to his brother. Because we went to live in the house debt was bought with the money of this accident. So my dad lost that house when my grandmother died. My father lost it out of debt, but he didn't lose it. He gave it away out of guilt. And then eventually led to me going into this major debt and repay this debt over time with some magic wands around the universe once I've done that constellation.
Yeah, what a powerful, I mean, just understanding generational curses, right? What the curse of the family is, right? That to say, hey, now we can crack this apart, give back to where it is, where the guilt, deal with it and get in flow, get in alignment, put everybody back in the places that they belong, right? In the family system, rather than out of loyalty carrying that stuff, just give it back to where it belongs.
At the end, John, everything reconnect to a form of relationship that we have with love, no? And I always say, even people, when they enter a relationship, there are two forces. One force tend to reunite two individuals, and that is love. Love always tend to bring two people together. But then there's another force that tend to divide, and that is family conscience. And it's about... it's at the end is a law of physics. It's about if love is stronger than the other force that tends to separate. Two people remain together until love, the force that tends to reunite, is stronger than the one that tends to divide. But when two individuals, they divide because the family conscience, the force is stronger, when do they go back? Where do they go back? To their families. I always say, when two individuals divide, where do they go? They go back to their family of origin.
Yeah, you're absolutely. It's almost like looking at it from the opposite forces that are pulling, that loyalty out, right? That pulling if the loyalty overcomes the love, right?
That's
and
right.
You see
that's it.
You see that all the time, right? Even if it costs me my life, Stefan
Even if it costs me my life, exactly. Give me goosebumps. It gives me goosebumps to say this.
Yeah.
Because
that's.
You go.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I deal majorly with relationship. My PowerPoint is relationship. That's why I always, when a couple therapy comes and I say, look, it's easy. There's two forces. One tends to reunite. One is love, wants to reunite. The other one tends to separate. That is family conscience. The one that is stronger is the one that eventually has the best out of it.
Wow, man, and it puts it in such simple terms to really understand. And you really have a gift for that, to really explain things in a very concise, beautiful way, very elegant. And I just want to say thank you for that, because
appreciate, John. Appreciate.
I tend to, sometimes think these things, and I'm like, Tiziano's got some really good stuff on Instagram that's going to be like really explaining things elegantly. And I'm like, this is great. And when you said the physics part, I'm like, absolutely. There is a physics to this. It's almost a hidden math into this, right? Into these probabilities that are happening in the family.
Yes. I always say, forget therapy, forget psychology, forget psychotherapy. Took it out as quantum physics, as science. One force wants you to unite. The other one wants to separate. The stronger one has the best out of it. Easy. Two people remain together despite the entanglement, despite the horrible things, despite the violence, the betrayal. Despite all of this, they still remain together because love pushes stronger than the family conscience. But when two individuals, perhaps there's no violence, there's no atrocity, nothing, but they divide, is because eventually the family conscience strength, this force that divide them, has the best out of it. Easy.
Wow. Hi, I'm John, host of Zulu One. When you become a supporter on Buzzsprout, you're investing in the future and mission of this podcast. Click the link in the description to get started. We're very grateful for your support, and thank you for being part of our journey. Wow. I mean, it really puts it in simple and easy to understand terms, So one of the things that kind of blew me away the most is that, you were talking about, and this is a really interesting concept for people to understand, and you're one of the only people that I've heard, Alberto Iturbe, was our first, facilitator that taught us about constellations in Romania, talked about judgment and talked about forgiveness and how forgiveness, first you have to absolve. First you have to say, I've been wronged, right? And then I am owed an apology, and I am, forgiving you, and that you put yourself, first you have to judge, and then you absolve, and then putting yourself in the superior position, maintaining that tethering. Can you talk about forgiveness a little bit? I love your explanation. I think you talked about it on a podcast, but I really love your explanation of forgiveness.
Forgiveness, John, comes majorly, how I look at it, from Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Christianity taught to us this form of forgiveness. Eventually, it's a forgiveness that comes from a place of above, of this Christ who is this man above, okay? In fact, when we do say, I forgive you, we place ourselves in a position of innocence that is unreachable from the other standpoint, from the other individual, to become as equal as us. So we will never have an equal relationship. The relationship is based on giving and taking. So if we place ourselves so above, this person who has wronged us will never be equal to us. And eventually we would hold him, how I would say, on the chain in terms of guilt, is the chain of guilt. Rather than forgiving, what I always acknowledge, what I always inform people is, I leave you with the consequence of your actions. So the other person can grow out of it. Why? Because they deal with guilt. And guilt states unconsciously, John, would you still love me even if I wrong you? So when I say this, I take from you, I take from the universe, I take from my mother, so I expand my soul. I deal with the consequence of my actions through guilt. But if you instead atone my guilt, John, my action, and you state, Tiziano, I forgive you. You place me in a little position. I remain a child in your eyes, and I will never be equal to you. What I can do, John, to step forward towards you is obviously owe you an apology, which is I'm sorry. Yesterday I was explaining the importance of say I'm sorry. I'm sorry is stating I want to come across, I want to reunite. I release the walls of protections that I place in front of me, and eventually I am less fearful. When somebody state I am sorry, they are less fearful. When somebody stand in pride, below anger and below sadness, they still protecting themselves from the pain they could face in your eyes. But when instead I state, John, I'm sorry, I'm willing to reunite, I'm willing to come across to you, I'm dropping my walls, I'm becoming vulnerable, and the body experience I'm sorry with a deep breath of release. When you state I am sorry from a soul standpoint, you release, you stand in peace, we can reunite.
Yeah, that's that sorry is almost a consent, a consenting
it
to
is.
acknowledging what is with the emotions and everything that comes with it. It's just such a powerful movement. Oh my gosh.
Another, John, acknowledgement, another way to say it, I leave you with the consequence of your actions. I know that at the time of your doing, you were not conscious. You were not aware of it. And I make a space for you in my heart. That is another way of saying. And eventually then we go to the deep concept of Bert Hellinger of pay back the pain. And I am a very big supporter of that. You have wronged me to a certain extent. I leave you with the consequence of your action. And I do my own life. Life always give me the opportunity to reset this experience in place, to pay back and to reunite us. So it gives me the opportunity to take from you somehow, perhaps by doing some wrong to you, and that gives us the opportunity to replace the giving and taking experience on the same level. Life always gives you the opportunity to reunite. And people see it, that's horrible, I cannot do something wrong and this and that. That is by staying on the empirical law of existence, giving and taking. If you are in a relationship with somebody and that somebody has taken too much from you, life will give you the opportunity to take it back. So to place the relationship back in place.
Wow. Oof. Yeah, that's That's one that goes against the, the modern, understanding of how exchange is supposed to work, right?
Big time.
Yeah.
The problem, John, the major problem is that when the problem is not the guilty person, the problem is the innocent person. Why? Because when somebody has wronged us, we place ourselves in such a position of innocence that is blissful. We feel in paradise. So we love to keep that person below, and eventually the relationship doesn't start any longer because we love this innocence. The person where people say, oh, they've gone through betrayal. I said, the problem is not the guilty one. The problem is the one who has suffered the betrayal. Because they are in a place of innocence that the guilty one can speak, say, do whatever they want. The innocent one doesn't even listen to them. They don't even hear them.
Yeah. It was, I did a constellation many years back, and I, for some reason, I had something to work on, obviously, and I was wearing all black. I had a black t-shirt on and black jeans. And I was picked to represent a perpetrator in 3 constellations in a row. And, as somebody that had been, it was ethnically cleansed in a minority part of Russia and of a ethnic minority. And the victim was looking at me with such judgment, and me in the role of the perpetrator, I was looking at them and be like, who do you think you are? You need me as much as I need you. Like, we're the same. We're the same energy. We have to, like, who do you, and it was like the same representation over and over again. And I'm like, oh, that's why the cycle repeats, because the victim needs the perpetrator as much as the perpetrator needs the victim. And that's such a hard thing to say to some people, right? Or to have people intellectually understand it rather than understand it from here, right?
Let me add something profound to this, John. Generally speaking, the one who loved the most is actually the perpetrator. Because it is the perpetrator who pays the major amount of guilt. It is the perpetrator, the one who takes the most from life. So they are generally the one who they love the most, the one that they sacrifice themselves for a bigger love.
Wow. Oh.
A month ago, let me jump into this, you would love to hear. A month ago, I've done a very big facilitation in Melbourne, Australia. We were 50 people. One person brought a suicidal experience, an hanging experience. So I set up the hanging experience, and this person went up on a chair. And everybody in the room started to cry, goosebumps. It was a very huge experience. And luckily, I also recorded it. I will put it out in sometimes on Instagram, on my social. Somebody asked me from the public, can you do something for him, the person who hanged them? And I stood in silence and I say, I cannot do anything for him rather than bow to his gesture. This man has taken so much from life that I am unable to deal with him. He's too big for me. He has faces too much guilt for me to deal with someone like that. I'm not as big. I need to only surrender to what he did and bow to him, because for me it's too big. To make you understand the capacities of these actions on a soul level. There's nothing I can do for him. There's nothing I can do around him because he's too big for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also, I was doing something similar. I was in a constellation where there was a child. It was a small child, right, that was very, very, very ill. And they were, it was a blind constellation. And, the representation of the child with the person that was representing death was like, very, very close. And it was the aunt that had brought this to the constellation, which shouldn't have happened in the first place, because it's not in the order in the hierarchy of the family. And it was like, can you do something here for the child? And it's like, no, you can't. The child there's no place in the hierarchy for the aunt to do the movement for the child. It's not their place to do that movement. And you just, respect the destiny of the system, right? And say, this is all that can happen, and simply acknowledge it, right?
Yeah, totally correct. When we do this work, we have higher guided, so we cannot do more than what the guidance is allowing us to, and it can become also dangerous when we try to do something that it is out of order, or it is out of reality of what is. At the end, Constellation, what are them? It's the observation of what is. So when we try to do something that is out of what is, it can become dangerous. Yeah.
There was another workshop that we did that was something about the government of Brazil. You know, we were in systemic constellations, right? Talking about the government of Brazil. He's like, there's no high representative of the government of Brazil. It's not our place to do a constellation for. And the person was Brazilian, trying to obviously do some stuff to heal their country or whatever. He's like, we have no place to do this, to understand, and we have no authority over what this position is, and we have to deeply respect whatever the destiny is of that larger system. So it really is so humbling to be like, stay in your lane, do what you can do for your system, and you and your children and your spouse and your family system, and that's all you can really do.
That is the power of this work, a surrender to humbleness. What is humbleness? And this is another thing that people confuse sometimes, humbleness with innocence. Humbleness is the acknowledgement of what is. So if I state, for example, sometimes if I state, I am the best in my field, if that is the truth, that is humbleness. That is a sign of humbleness. Instead of, I'm good in good capacity, but actually that is not what is. That is innocence. I remain innocent to belong, despite I know and despite the facts are stating that I'm the best in my field. I say, I'm average, I'm good like everybody else, perhaps. That is a form of innocence rather than humbleness. Humbleness is the acknowledgement of what is. This is why constellations are the most humble experience and therapy of them all, because you acknowledge and observe what is.
Mm. So tell me a little bit about the ecosystem in Australia. Is our Family Constellations extraordinarily popular in Australia? Is it something that is relatively new? Is there resistance? What does that look like?
It is relatively new. I say I have been the one bringing more to public eyes, like more expanding in terms of videos, in terms of podcasting, in terms of interviews. I put myself out a lot. But there are also some elderly who they are doing, who have been part of their community as well to facilitate, and they are more. I would say their approach is more close to the Ellinger approach, but also I resonate and not sometimes with them. My approach looks a lot at guilt. I see that their approach is more of an innocent behavior and approach. So that's the only things that it's different between us, I would say, is the approach, but we are very in alignment with friends and everything. It is something that I'm doing in every city around Australia now. I travel all around Australia, so we have following all around Australia. It is getting popular, John. It is getting popular. I also acknowledge that in my facilitation, there's a lot of people coming from overseas. So it's not only Australians here. So the people traveling from Asia, Dubai, Singapore, they come to visit us and to do this work with us. But what I say about Australia is that it is a healing country. People come here to heal. There's a lot of sun. And you know that the population of the South, that's why the Zulu, like your podcast, the Zulu one. Yeah. So the Zulu, the African American, or all the population of Africa and Brazil and the Aboriginal here, they are the one that they more, I would call it, conscious. But why they are more conscious? Because of the sun. So there's a lot of sun and salt water, and the sun is the source of life. So we say it's not a case that the population itself, they are spiritually awakened, how you would call it, because of the power of the sun also. So it's a component, but majorly, what's the difference, north and south? The sun.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about kind of like the larger themes. And I know that, Australia was a prison colony of England. So are there themes that come up, for the historical, are there a lot of historical themes that happen in Australia?
I do not work much with that. I've always acknowledged
Okay.
a lot of people, they actually ask me this question, and I say, it is not my place to perhaps work on this kind of larger system, but there's also a reason behind it, John, that I would like to address. I'm a person which I am completely absent of judgment, I would say. And it is a gift that I took from my father. My father is a friend with the priest of the town and the worst criminal. And I've been bad in my life, and I've also been good. So I'm really absent of judgment. The major constellation that comes to me are people that perpetrator, victim, those kind of dynamic that you acknowledge. Also for my capability to deal with guilt, because I've dealt with guilt myself. So when I have to say about atrocities, the English coming here and taking over the country and stuff, I always look beyond that, John. And I always look at this force that tends to reunite that which has been separated. So whatever happens, I know it always leads towards the better.
Yeah.
When there is a collision, I call it like COVID-19, for example. When there is a big collision, big destiny that collides, something better comes afterwards. Why? Because the universe moves like a jellyfish, contraction and expansion, contraction and expansion. So when there is a war, there is an expansion straight after. Another war, an expansion straight after. Another contraction, another expansion. That is how I see what we call it: war, difficulties, economic crisis, and on and on. A change in place.
Yeah, that's so intuitive, because Jan Jacob Stam, are you familiar with Jan Jacob Stam?
I do know him, but not familiar with his work.
Yeah, he does a systemic organizational constellations, and he talks about the individual consciousness, the consciousness of the collective, of the community, and then the evolutionary force. And that's exactly what you're talking about. That contraction is COVID-19, World War II, the internet, modern medicine, plumbing, modern sewerage and plumbing systems, epidemics, the Black Plague, are all those contractions and expansions. You're absolutely, that's so cool that you see it from that perspective, because a lot of people see it from see those evolutionary forces or these new movements as like a weaponization of their trauma, right? In some way, they're like, I was hurt, so this is how I'm going to present to the world with these wounds. And it's so cool to see somebody else that sees it from this systemic perspective.
This is, John, the concept that Beth Hellinger acknowledged to us, and we understood widely. The individual conscience submit to the family conscience. The family conscience submit to the group conscience. The group conscience submit to a nation conscience, and the small individual submit to the bigger conscience. When this discrepancy happens is when the individual does not submit to the group one, and they place their own personal experience into this bigger love, which wants to reunite, which expand, which has hierarchical capacity. Like you as an individual submit to your family, like your individual conscience submit to the family conscience. It's not the way around. You cannot turn the family conscience and make it submit to your individual. If you do that, you enter in what we call disharmony. And eventually the inner pressure of guilt sabotage you to place you back in place. So these people that they complain, they this, they that, somehow they sabotage themselves unconsciously to place themselves back in place, because eventually to a soul level they submit to the bigger order. Easy.
Yeah, that loyalty force is something to be reckoned with, right? Is that
yes.
How strong that force is.
Yes. And we go back, John, to the relationship experience now, which I like to address it. Like, I love this man who is the violent one, or perhaps who is the one that my mother doesn't like, because perhaps this man represents my father, who my mother broke up with. I love this man so much, but the pressure of my mother, of my family, brings me back in place. So I need to leave this man and perhaps go with a man who is more suitable for my mother. And this is the loyalty. I see so many relationships like, I love this person, but I need to stay away from him because when I'm with him, something doesn't work. What is that it doesn't work? It's the family conscience. You are pressured to sabotage it, to place yourself back in place until you take from your mother. Until you state unconsciously, mother, would you still love me even if I enter a relationship with a man who is just like my father? And when you are capable to face this guilt, bam, you break the boundaries, you expand, and you can enter what you would call a relationship that you really wanted, a relationship that is suitable for love, for what you really seek. Yeah.
Yeah, and that concept of out expanding the pattern. It's not like the pattern goes away. You outgrow it and out expand it, right? Is that what that is?
Yes, the more you take, John, the more guilt you face, the more you take from life, and the more you expand. But if you cannot take from your mother, you go back in line with what your family is forcing you to be. Like if your family wants you to be with a man who is yellow, but you want a man who is white, you might dream about the white man, but you go back in yellow because the pressure of the family conscience brings you back in line, despite you dreaming about the man who is white.
Wow, jeez, man. So your focus mainly is interpersonal relationships, and is that the main focus of your work that you've been doing over the years?
I do. I'm 24/7 in a relationship, love, and a lot of guilt. I deal a lot with guilt, facing guilt in divorce, in separation, this and that. Guilt in general is my main topic, but relationship is obviously in terms of what you would call it more to the surface, how you call it out, relationship. But relationship on a deeper level goes on guilt. Why? Because relationship look towards the mother. So if you cannot take from your mother, you cannot face any guilt. That's why I always say, yes, my topic is relationship, but if you want to go on a soul level, is guilt.
Wow. Yeah, and so many people see that guilt as they have a different definition of what that looks like, right? And see guilt as not this thing that you should embrace in some capacity or let flow, and the guilt of taking from your mother and not having the and because you're seeing her smaller if you're not taking, right? If you're not taking from her directly.
If you don't take from your mother, you diminish your mother, her in her role, and you also diminish yourself. The less guilt you face, you are capable to face, the less you can take from life. So the less you experience life. The more you take, and the more life you experience. I give you a very straight example, John, for you to understand, and also your beautiful community here. You see in a room, when innocent people, they talk, they say nothing. You don't even hear them. You don't even listen to them. They talk here. But when somebody has faced guilt, they speak in depth. They say 3 words and everybody listens to them. Everybody feels the amplitude of their words. Innocent people, you don't even listen to them. I always say, in a room, you acknowledge right away who is innocent, who doesn't pay guilt. Because they speak here. They speak about the weather. They talk about nothing. But when somebody has faced guilt, they speak in depth. You feel the depth of their statement. Whatever they say, 3 words or 5, doesn't matter. But acknowledge when somebody speaks to you. Somebody who faced guilt speaks in depth. When they didn't face guilt, they speak about the football, the weather, about nothing. That's what I say.
And is that not facing guilt out of loyalty to their family system?
My major understanding, John, is something happened with their mother when they were little, and they've seen their mother struggling, they've seen their mother in difficulties, they've seen their mother depressed. So they parentified her, and they swap over. Why? On a biological level, if they have seen their mother struggle, what they say is, Mother, I'm gonna give it to you now that you are struggling. So when you will be okay, you will give me back. But this promise is never broken. They do this promise out of keeping their mother alive. Why? On a biological level, if your mother die, you die too, because she's your nurturing. From 0 to 9 years old, biologically, you're so intertwined with her that if she dies, you die too. So in order for you to avoid her dying, you give back to her. And then you never break this promise, and you keep distance from her because you perceive on a morphogenetic level, I cannot take from my mother, otherwise she dies.
Oh, wow.
So when we are capable to release this promise, release this interrupted movement, and we allow love to flow in order again, hierarchical from the mother coming down to the son, to the daughter, then we are able to take from her, to face guilt, and to take from life and from everybody, from anybody.
Yeah, and that Hellinger concept of parents give and children only receive, right? To be in order correctly. Right?
That's accurate. That's very accurate. Yeah. Parents give, and the less you break this order, and the better is for both individuals, the daughter, the son, and the mother as well. I give you an example of women. You see, when a woman doesn't take from her mother, she enters a relationship with little boys, and in the long run, she's angry and tired. I always say right away, when a woman is angry and tired, she's in a relationship with a little boy. Angry, why? Because she gives too much. Tired, why? Because by giving too much, she's tired.
Oh, that's, man, I know a lot of people that could, really benefit from hearing that, right?
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, talking about little boys. There's my little guy.
Hello.
Hey,
Ciao.
Say hi.
Hi.
Ciao. Pleasure to meet you.
Hi.
Yeah, my son just got home from school, so I mean, that's such a powerful thing to give people, kind of the understanding of, some men are not looking for a partner, they're looking for their mother. To reconnect that relationship and their dysfunction,
Big time, John, big time, particularly when a man has not entered in full the sphere of influence of his father. Perhaps he's loyal to his mother, he has seen his mother struggle, he feels empowered by being by the side of his mother, so he seeks the value that his mother giving to him in other women. This is what psychology calls narcissism. What is narcissism? Yeah. Narcissism is the second sphere of influence. As a man in the sphere of influence of his mother, he doesn't feel the value within the one from his father, but he seeks the value from the acknowledgement of his mother. If this man has parentified his mother, he's going to be a superhero for another little woman. Like, he tried to enchant her by being the hero in the relationship because he seeks the acknowledgement from her. So actually, instead of giving to her by being the hero, he actually takes the attention from her because he needs that validation in order to stand up, in order to feel empowered and valued.
Yeah, that's the how I've always, that's such a great point, and it's a new perspective for me, because I always thought that narcissism was like, you're stuck as a 3-year-old in the emotional development of a 3-year-old. It's like everything's mine, in that it like doesn't have that exchange. You're stuck in that inner child is stuck around that 3-4-year-old age where you can't have an appropriate relationship with somebody else, and you're still wounded frozen at that age.
You are correct, very correct, on a biological and psychological level. Is an underdevelopment. Narcissism is an underdevelopment. Is an underdevelopment of which part? The feminine side, which is seen still of I take value from a woman, rather than actually I empower this woman by serving her. Yeah. So it is an underdevelopment of the feminine that gives us as men the inability to step into the masculine, to the manhood. But once we are willing to give to women as the right order of things, to serve them, to protect them, to provide for them, then we enter the sphere of influence of our father, where we become men in full adult. So instead of taking from women value, we give to them out of our own value. So we serve them. Why we serve them? Because they serve the life the most by bringing life forward, by carry life forward.
Man, that's I know there's full, social movements that are based on that dysfunction, right?
I know, Joe. They will ban this conversation. They will ban this conversation. Bro.
Yeah. But, that's part of the systemic resistance, that we have to have these conversations especially as men, and men that are in healing, and men that are working. One of the Zulu one themes is to work on your shit, right? It's like, we all have shit, work on your shit, right?
I bet.
So, to be able to do that. And, having this conversation with two men talking about, really what stepping into masculinity really looks like, and right-sizing your relationship with your mother, and right-sizing the relationship with your father, and honoring both of them, and being actually in the position of their child as a male child of them, and the empowerment of that is where true masculinity comes from, that honors that femininity as well, rather than coming from a dysfunctional side.
You are so right. Many people think that tyranny, for example, is an over masculinity. No, tyranny is the absence of masculinity. I always say, a tyrannical man, most of the time, is a man close to his mother. So he seeks everything for himself, as you say, because he's underdeveloped. He doesn't pursue the best for the kingdom, but he pursues the best for himself, and he builds up a kingdom upon it. So that is a tyrannical man. A man who is a leader rather than a tyrant seeks the best for his community, for his people, for his family, for his group, for his... even myself as an individual, we are 7 people working for myself, the language of the soul. I seek the best for all of them as 6, and as 7 as group. So what's best for her, what's best for him, what's best for her, like for what's the best for the community, for the group. Yeah, not for what's best for Tiziano. That is a tyrannical approach.
Yeah, and it's an approach that looks for many positive iterations over long periods of time.
Yeah.
Right? Not transactional, it's building, right? Building rather than destructive. So it's long-term success.
They are little high. So somebody who is tyrannical, and even a woman can be tyrannical in relationship or whatever, she seeks constant I and then a big low, I and then a big low, I and then a big low. Why? Because she doesn't deal when she's with the low. She doesn't want to deal with her own shit or our own shit or my own shit.
Yeah.
So I seek another high to don't deal with the low. But once I deal with the low, rather than living on a high and low, high and low, I live on a constant peace, on a flat experience from a place of wholeness. I am grounded, I'm whole. But until I seek I haven't found wholeness within myself. I haven't.
Yeah, it's that vacillation between the victim and the perpetrator, right?
There you go.
Just you're right. And
spot on. You just said it's spot on. I'm the victim, I become the perpetrator. I'm the victim, I become the perpetrator. It's just, it's just up and down. That's it.
Yeah.
But flat experience, that's what gives you wholeness, grounding, and that's where you can find a partner who is suitable for the project of life, to bring life forward, to carry life forward, and to serve.
Man, that's powerful. That's so powerful. Tiziano, it's been awesome talking to you, man. I'm really happy that we finally were able to do this. Hopefully we can do this again in the future. And we would love to invite you to come to the US and put some stuff together. We could, do some workshops here. So, if you could let everybody know on the podcast how to get a hold of you, how to, where to follow you on social media. So I think that would be really great.
First of all, thank you for having me, John. Really in resonance with this conversation, morphic resonance, if we want to call it.
Right.
So you can find me on www.tizianosguerso.com, which is TIZIANOSGUERSO.com. Big time on social media, on Instagram at Tiziano_Sguerso, on Facebook, Tiziano Sguerso, the language of the soul. Which is soon also trademark registered, because we are about to release my book 3-4 months, my first book in systemic therapy. I do workshop all around the world, not yet in America, but this is a beautiful opportunity, John, to connect and perhaps do something together as this beautiful relationship and unfolding and service can grow more and more. Yeah,
thank you so much, man. I'm so happy we connected, and I'm so happy to to see you continue to grow and hopefully bring you to the US soon and do some awesome healing work and continue doing what you're doing, man. It's so needed. So I really appreciate it.
Same, John, and big hug your way.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for tuning in to the Zulu One podcast. If you found value in today's podcast, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means everything to us. And thank you for being part of this journey.